What is up, everybody? I'm back here today with a video on Pseudo-Dionysius and his theory of symbolism. So Dionysius is in this Neoplatonic tradition, but he's also very, very closely related to Aquinas. And so, he's one of my bigger influences, one of the biggest influences on me, and so I figured I'd make a few videos about him to continue this series on classical metaphysics. So let's talk really about Dionysius's theory of symbolism. What exactly is he doing with this? Well, actually, his take on symbols is a fundamental part of his metaphysical outlook, stemming from Proclus and Plotinus. And you might think, oh, well, Dionysius being a Christian, etc., this discussion of symbolism is really only pertaining to his take on scripture and his take on Christian theology. That's not actually true. His theory of symbolism is a deduction strictly from his Procline metaphysics. So let's talk about this. First of all, let me give you a little bit of background. In Epistle 9, 9.2 specifically, line 1108b in the Dionysian Corpus, he explicitly states that he's deriving some scriptural support for his theory of symbolism from Paul and Romans. And Dionysius says, quote, "And the world ordering itself of all that appears present, the invisible things of God, as Paul in the True Word says." So this is going to be his scriptural support for his theory of symbolism. And you're going to see what he means, how he does an exegesis on this passage with what I spell out in a few minutes. So, first of all, what is a symbol? Well, as you can see here, here's a cross. This is a symbol. And you can think about all sorts of stuff. So symbols are interesting because they reveal and conceal at the same time. They reveal in being a representation of some sort of thing, event, whatever. But at the same time, they conceal because they're not the true thing or event. So, Dionysius actually is going to use this to talk about God. And this is really, really important. So for Dionysius, God is totally hidden. God is absolutely ineffable. He's the ineffable one. Okay, so he is, as the cause of all beings, as the cause of all that there is, God is not any being, and he's not anything, which is why Dionysius talks about God not being, God being non-existent. Okay, this is a little bit of a tricky thing. It's quite tricky, actually, to think about, but for Dionysius, God transcends even being itself, precisely because he is the creator, or he is the condition for the possibility of being at all. And as that, he can't partake in that thing. Okay, so this is a Neoplatonic thing. You could think about it in terms of an argument such as, if X creates Y, X cannot be a part of Y, or X cannot participate in Y. And so God creates, or the one creates all things, therefore he can't be one or participate in those things. That includes being, so he therefore can't participate in or be a being. Excuse me, I'm a bit sick, but so I think that that is probably the most difficult thing to understand. I don't even fully comprehend it. I don't think we can comprehend it, technically speaking, because we only think in terms of being, but I won't get into that. In any case, that is something to really, really think about and to kind of wrestle with. And if you're interested in it, let me know in the comments, and I can make some more videos on Dionysius here, and maybe even talk about being and transcendence. But, okay, in any case, God transcends all being for Dionysius here. Now, we think about the consequence of this. We only think in terms of being. So when I think of something, I'm only thinking of it in terms of what it is. I'm only thinking and I'm only grasping things in terms of being or beings, okay? I can only think about beings. Whenever I think of, say, my mom, a sport, weightlifting, whatever I want to think of, I'm thinking about some sort of determinate being. But if God transcends being, then he necessarily has to transcend all my thought. And so I cannot think of him. And so this is a consequence of Dionysius and Neoplatonism. But what this entails, in fact, is that all representations, all symbols, say icons, scripture, descriptions of God, everything that you can think of or make or predicate about God is necessarily falling short of expressing what or who God is. So everything whatsoever that we can say or think about God is saying or thinking not God. This is very, very interesting, actually. I think this is quite radical, because the consequence is that we, in fact, can never grasp what God is. That's the consequence for us. We can never grasp what God is. We can never know who or what God is. He is the ineffable, mysterious, divine darkness, and we have to end in total silence of the mind, as Dionysius frequently says here. So, this is why some icon painters paint Dionysius with a blue halo around him, because blue represents just this total divine darkness. When we approach the transcendent divine, because of this metaphysical deduction and because of this system that leads us to this talk of symbolism, when we approach the divine, we are always falling short. We're never quite grasping what or who he is. So that's one side of the symbolism. All symbols, because of the total transcendence of God, due to him not being a being, because of that, and because we can. So here's the argument. Let me say it this way. Because God, to sum up, because God isn't a being, and because he doesn't participate in being, combine that with the fact that we can only grasp being, the deduction from that is that we can never grasp God, and so all symbols, all predications that we make are necessarily falling short of God, what he is or who he is. So that's one side of Dionysius' symbolism here. Symbols are always falling short. But on the other side, they are expressing God. Okay, so you may think, well, how the hell can this happen? Well, that's because we have another aspect to Dionysius' Neoplatonism. So on the one hand, for his Neoplatonic metaphysics, we have God as truly ineffable and all thought about God falling short. And on the other hand, we have God as a theophany, or being as a theophany. So really, we have these two things. So I've talked about the first. Let's talk about the second for a minute. So what does it mean to say being is a theophany? Well, for Dionysius, following Proclus, following Plotinus, and following Iamblichus especially, and also some Christian fathers here, John Scotus Erigena, who comes after Dionysius, Maximus, who comes a little bit after Dionysius. These guys are going to be big proponents. You can probably find it in the Cappadocians. But for all these thinkers, being, meaning reality outside, so look, for instance, I'm looking outside at plants and grass and stuff, all of being is a theophany, or a manifestation of the divine. So I think this is really, really explicit in Iamblichus for the pagans, and extremely explicit in Dionysius and Erigena. So what this essentially means is that the plants I see outside, the cars, the grass, the trees, everything that I'm looking at is a literal manifestation of God. Okay, so God, for these thinkers, is in all things. He is all things in all things. Now, there's a heavy Neoplatonic argument and talk about what exactly that means going on behind the scenes here. But for all intents and purposes, what you can do is think about the plant, the book, me, my clothing, everything is a manifestation of God. God is literally in all things as the condition for them being at all. And this follows as a consequence of the metaphysical arguments that God is just being in unity. And so you can deduce that from there. So it's not just a poetic statement here. I want to stress that. Dionysius is getting this directly from Proclus and Plotinus, who lay out the pretty solid arguments for why this is the case. But for his theory of symbolism, all you need to know is that when you look outside, like I'm doing right now, and you notice the plants and stuff, that is a literal, direct manifestation of God. So God is there in those things, conditioning them to be at all times. Okay, because, and again, that follows from God being the good and the one. Plotinus talks about God or the one being the power of all things. It's the same idea here in Dionysius. The condition or the power for these things being at all is God. And so, if you accept that, which is, again, pretty difficult to do, but I think the arguments for it are quite strong. But if you accept that, and you accept this idea that God is totally, utterly ineffable, then you can see how we can say that symbols are always going to be totally inadequate to express God. Yet, when we look outside and we look at symbols, whether they be the plants or whether they be symbols that we talk about, say, in Scripture, they are expressing, in some sense, a part of God. And so this is why Dionysius says that symbols both conceal and reveal at the same time. My Greek isn't very good, but he uses a word in Greek that means shielding and revealing at the same time. And so symbols, because God is totally ineffable, are shielding us from really getting at what he is or who he is. But at the same time, because God is because being is a theophany, because God is in all things, the symbols also reveal who he is or what he is at the same time. And so what you have here is you have another very strange idea in Dionysius, where God is both revealed and concealed at the same time in things. And that's his theory of symbolism. And it is quite paradoxical. Dionysius is a paradoxical thinker. This whole Neoplatonic tradition, what they are doing is coming to, this is the way I like to think about it, they are using a rigorous logical system of Neoplatonism to finally push themselves to the utter limit of thinking. And at that utter limit of thinking is paradox. And this is quite a beautiful idea, I think, to try to wrap your head around. It's kind of similar to what Kant's doing in his Critique of Pure Reason, to be honest. Once you reason hard enough, or go through all the logical movements, you end up hitting a wall. Your reason hits a wall, and you cannot transcend beyond that wall. It's totally ineffable. And once you get to that point, you see that the world is very strange, and that paradox seems to abound. I think this is quite beautiful to try to reflect on, and trying to get there, trying to use your reason to reach these paradoxes is a really interesting and fun journey. In fact, it's one of the reasons why I love Dionysius so much. But, I hope this video has helped you in kind of trying to wrap your mind around Dionysius' theory of symbols. So let me sum up here. Basically, what you have is God is totally ineffable because he's beyond being, and since we grasp only being in our cognition, we cannot grasp God. And so symbols, whether those be physical symbols or words, anything that we speak of or try to talk about in regards to God is going to fall short, because everything that we're talking about or speaking of or looking at is a being, and God's transcending that. But on the other hand, since being is a theophany or a manifestation of God, symbols are expressing him. So symbolism for Dionysius is both revealing and concealing at the same time. That should be, I think, a clear summary, but let me add one more thing. And this will just take a second. Dionysius and Plotinus and Proclus are not pantheists. So I want you to really think about this. Pantheism is the strict identification of God and the world. When I say that when I say that being is a theophany, I am not identifying God with the world, because God, again, infinitely transcends being. So being is a theophany, and meaning that the world is saturated with the divine, as Iamblichus would say, but at the same time, God is transcending being and transcending the world. So pantheists would reject that latter part of the claim. So we're not talking about a pantheism here, but we are talking about a paradoxical yet philosophically robust Neoplatonism. So I hope that helped. Like, comment, and subscribe. Let me know if you want some more videos on Pseudo-Dionysius.